She abandoned her baby in the trash, and still she wasn't a monster. The desert held its breath that night. Heat clung to the cracked pavement like oil, slow to lift even after the sun had vanished. The sky above Eli's auto shop stretched wide and empty, soaked in purple dusk, stars still waiting their turn. There was no traffic, no crickets, no wind, just silence. Then a sound broke it, thin, wet. A baby's cry, too raw to be imagined, too fragile to be real. It sliced through the stillness, coming from the alley behind the garage. Eli's hand froze mid-throw, a bag of trash dangling over the rusted dumpster. He turned his head slowly. That cry didn't belong out here, not in the desert, not at night. For a moment he didn't move, just stood in the heat, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the floodlight's edge. The cry came again, closer, needier, not loud, but urgent. He moved toward it without thinking, boots crunching gravel, the dull ache in his right knee flaring with each step. Combat injury, years old, but it still spoke up in the quiet. Just like this kid. He followed the sound to the far edge of the lot, where junked cars slumped in rows like forgotten skeletons. It was back here the noise took shape. Nestled between two rusted-out pickups, half buried under a torn thermal blanket, lay a bundle that shifted with small, frantic jerks. He crouched, peeled the blanket back, and stopped breathing. A baby. But not like any baby he'd ever seen. Its skin was a soft, dusky violet, with faint blue undertones that shimmered in the low light. The hair was long, thick, and black as oil, wet with sweat and curled around a too small face. The eyes, when they fluttered open, were glassy and dark, unfocused. A soft whimper slipped from its lips, skin like satin, tiny fingers curled in slow motion. It was barely clinging to life. Eli's heart knocked against his ribs. He glanced around, expecting what exactly? A mother? A trap? A prank? The alley was empty. The baby was real. It was dying. And then she appeared. At first, he thought she was a mirage, a ripple of heat in the distance. But she stepped forward, one trembling foot at a time, and the air seemed to warp around her. She was tall, thin to the point of collapse, her violet skin dull with dust and blood. Her long black hair hung in tangled ropes over her shoulders. Her clothes, or what remained of them, were torn, half charred, and stained with things that looked like oil but smelled like copper. She looked like she'd been walking through hell. But it was her face that stopped him cold. Her eyes, huge, slanted, luminous, weren't angry. They weren't even afraid. They were hollow, exhausted beyond the point of pain, the kind of look you see in soldiers long after the war is over. And yet, when she saw the child in his arms, her body lurched forward, hands reaching, but her legs gave out and she crumpled to her knees. Eli didn't know what she was, but he knew what she wasn't. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't a monster. She was a mother who had left her baby in the trash, and that made no sense until he saw her hands. Her fingernails were cracked, bleeding. Her palms scraped raw. Her legs shook violently, barely holding her up. Her mouth moved, forming sounds that weren't words, just air, broken and pleading. She'd left the child because she couldn't carry it another step. She hadn't wanted to abandon him. She'd simply collapsed before she made it to help. Something clenched in Eli's chest, tight and heavy. He moved on instinct, one arm still cradling the baby, the other reaching under her shoulders. Her body tensed at the contact, but not in anger. More like shame. She was ice cold, bones under skin, light as paper. "Come on," he whispered. "You're not done yet." Inside the shop, the air was stale with motor oil, old sweat and machine grease. But it was cooler than the desert, and it didn't smell like death. He cleared the workbench and laid the baby down first, then helped the woman to the ground, resting her against a stack of tires. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes wouldn't stay open. Eli grabbed a bottle of electrolyte water from his emergency kit, unscrewed the cap and offered it to her. She didn't take it, so he brought it to her lips. The moment the liquid touched her tongue, her eyes snapped open. Her hands rose, shaky, unsure. But she gripped the bottle with trembling fingers and drank like it was the first thing she'd tasted in days. When she finally stopped, she sagged back, eyes fluttering. The baby let out a soft protesting noise, and Eli turned quickly, soaked the corner of a clean cloth with the rest of the water, and dabbed it gently at the child's mouth. The infant suckled weakly, that faint, instinctive will to live. He felt something twist deep in his gut. He didn't even know what species this was, but something about the baby felt right in his arms. Familiar, devastatingly fragile. Across the room, the woman was watching. She hadn't taken her eyes off him. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not understanding, just recognition. He wasn't her enemy. He hadn't left the baby to die. He'd brought them in. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came, just a hoarse whisper in a language he didn't know. Still, the way she looked at him, it said everything. Why? Why are you helping me? He didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense, but his mind flashed, unbidden, to a memory he never let himself linger on. His wife's voice, his daughter's laugh, the tiny grave marker out past the edge of town that no one visited anymore. He looked down at the child again, still alive, still holding on. Because I couldn't save mine, he said quietly, but maybe I can save yours. He stood and turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the soft hum of the lantern near the bench. Then he laid a cot beside her, not close enough to startle her, but near enough if she needed anything. You're safe here, he murmured. Just rest. Her head tilted slightly. Not a nod. Not quite. But her eyes closed. Eli sat down with his back against the wall, his sidearm within reach out of habit, but he didn't think he'd need it. The woman, whatever she was, had done something he'd never expected. She'd walked through fire, crossed half the desert, starved herself to keep the baby alive. And when she couldn't go any farther, she put the child where someone might find him, in the trash, because that's how much she had left. That wasn't weakness. That was the last act of a dying kind of love. He looked at her again, her violet skin now rising and falling with sleep, her fingers curled toward her child. She wasn't from this world, but tonight she was in his, and that made her his responsibility, even if the whole damn sky came looking for her. The desert morning came in slow and bright, spilling through the cracked window panes of the garage like honey across worn metal. Heat hadn't settled in yet, but it was on its way. Eli stood over the stovetop in the break room, waiting for the eggs to stop sticking. His shoulders ached, and his back twinged from a night spent on the floor, but he barely noticed. He kept looking toward the door. In the dim corner of the garage, she was still asleep, curled on the cot he'd dragged out the night before, limbs loose and tangled in the blanket. Her long black hair fanned across the pillow like dark silk, catching hints of violet as the sunlight filtered in. Her breathing was steady. The baby lay beside her, small and warm under the blanket, chest rising and falling in soft rhythm. He turned back to the eggs. They sizzled unevenly, browning around the edges. Not the best he'd ever made, but it would do. He plated them, grabbed a fork, then paused. She might not know what a fork was. She might not eat eggs. Hell, she might not even be able to eat human food. Still, he carried the plate over and set it down gently on the workbench nearby. As if sensing the movement, she stirred. One hand reached instinctively for the child. When her fingers brushed the baby's back, her eyes blinked open, slow, guarded, still caught between fear and sleep. Eli crouched nearby, careful not to move too fast. You're safe, he said quietly. Still here. No one's coming. Her gaze drifted to him, then to the plate. She looked at it for a long moment, then back at him. When he nodded once, she pushed herself upright with a grunt, the motion stiff, like her bones ached all over. He could see the dried blood around her elbows now, the bruises along her arms, the way her collarbone jutted too sharply under her skin. She was starving. He nudged the plate closer. Eat. She hesitated, not from distrust, but caution, as if afraid it might disappear. Then finally she picked up the fork. Her grip was awkward at first, like she was trying to remember how to hold it. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed, and let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like relief. Eli let her eat. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The way her shoulders relaxed with each bite, the way she occasionally glanced toward the baby, then at him, then back to the food, it told him enough. She wasn't just eating. She was grounding herself, rejoining the living. When she finished, she set the fork down gently and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her eyes met his again. This time they held something new, not fear, not caution, recognition. Thank you, she said. Her voice was soft, slightly accented, but clear, human almost. English, he blinked. You speak English? A little. Her words came slowly, carefully, like walking on unfamiliar ground. Learned listening, old recordings. You've been here before, he asked. She shook her head. Not here. Her eyes dropped to the baby. Ran, landed, hid. Eli didn't push. He just nodded once and glanced at the child. What's his name? She hesitated. Then, Seru. The name was smooth and foreign, but it fit. The little one stirred in his sleep at the sound of it, a tiny hand flopping out from under the blanket. He's beautiful, Eli said quietly. Strong. She watched him say it, as if measuring whether he meant it. Then slowly she nodded. Yes. A silence stretched between them, not awkward, just full of things unsaid. He looked around the shop at the scattered tools, the empty coffee mugs, the map of nowhere pinned to the wall. This place isn't much, he said, but it's quiet, safe. People don't come out this far unless something's broken. She didn't answer, but her body relaxed a little more, like she believed him. He stood up and walked to the mini fridge, pulling out a bottle of water. He cracked the seal, handed it to her, and this time she didn't hesitate. She drank in long gulps, stopping only when her arms began to tremble again. You can stay as long as you need, he said. She looked up at him, studying his face like she was trying to see something beneath it. Why? The word hung in the air, simple, honest, heavy. Eli didn't answer right away. He glanced down at his hand, at the small scar that ran across his knuckle, a reminder of things he never talked about, of what he'd lost. Because someone should have helped you, he said finally, and no one did. The truth sat between them, sharp, quiet. She didn't thank him again. She didn't need to. Her shoulders settled. Her eyes softened. You have a name? She asked after a while. Eli. Zara, she said. My name is Zara. Eli gave a small nod, tucking the name away like something fragile. Outside, the sun had fully risen. Heat was beginning to build, shimmering off the road in the distance. But in the shop, the air stayed still and thick with the strange peace of survival. Zara pulled her knees up to her chest and held Seru gently in her lap. Eli watched her for a moment, then grabbed an old toolbox and sat down on it. There was nothing else to say just yet. Nothing that wouldn't push too hard, too fast. So they sat. Two strangers, two species, sharing eggs in silence, and for the first time in years, Eli felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone. The garage had gone quiet, save for the steady ticking of a cooling engine and the faint whistle of wind slipping through a crack in the back door. Outside, the heat was settling into its nightly rhythm, still heavy, but no longer aggressive. Inside, the world felt smaller, slower, safer. Eli leaned back against the edge of the workbench, wiping sweat and motor oil from his hands with a rag. He'd been pretending to organize tools for the past hour, but in truth, he'd just been watching them. Zara and Seru. She sat on the cot, her posture relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. Her back curved slightly as she cradled her child to her chest. The garage lights were dimmed, casting everything in soft gold, and the shadows danced gently across her skin. Rich violet tones darkening along her arms, fading into the glow of the baby pressed close to her body. Seru suckled quietly, small fingers splayed against her skin. His hair curled against her chest, damp with sweat, and his eyes fluttered closed with each rhythmic pull. Zara didn't look at Eli. She didn't need to. Her focus was complete, total devotion. It wasn't just survival. It was comfort, connection, maybe the last piece of normal she had left. Eli swallowed hard and looked away, suddenly feeling like a trespasser in a moment that wasn't meant for him. But he didn't leave. After a few minutes, Zara shifted, adjusting Seru gently and wrapping him back in the thin cotton blanket Eli had found in a box of old camping gear. She kissed the top of his head and laid him down beside her. Only then did she speak. You've been kind, she said quietly. Her voice still carried the lilt of a learned language, but her pronunciation had improved, less hesitant, more confident. You didn't have to be. Eli glanced over. Didn't feel like a choice. She looked at him, really looked. Her eyes, luminous and dark, held a weight that seemed older than she was. Most people choose fear. I've had enough of fear, he said. Didn't do me much good when I needed it. She nodded slowly. Then she stood, arms wrapped around herself, and walked toward the open garage door. The sky outside was a deep indigo now, speckled with stars. No moon, just a vast stretch of quiet. I was a navigator, she began, her voice low and even. One of 12. Our mission was not military. We were meant to observe, learn, offer contact where safe. Eli didn't speak. He just listened. We made contact once before, decades ago, from what I understand now. It went badly. Your kind reacted with violence, fear. The council decided to wait, to watch longer. She paused, eyes locked on the stars. But not everyone agreed with that choice. A faction broke off, radical, angry. They believed contact was a threat. They wanted control, purity. Eli's jaw tensed. He recognized that kind of ideology, had seen it wear different faces over the years. It always ended the same way. They attacked our vessel, she said. Not from your world, from ours. My ship was a diplomatic transport, non-combatant. We tried to escape. Her fingers clenched around her elbows, gripping tightly. I was pregnant when we launched. I wasn't supposed to be. It was frowned upon, dangerous. But he, Seru's father, he was also crew, engineer, brilliant. We thought we had time. Eli watched her silently, heart beating slow and heavy in his chest. When the attack came, he stayed behind to overload the reactors, give us a window to flee. He died thinking he bought us a chance. Her voice cracked slightly, the first real break in her composure. But she didn't cry. We jumped, damaged, no control over direction or landing. I don't even know what system we ended up in. The ship tore apart on entry. I took an escape pod and crashed somewhere. I don't know where. She turned to face him. I only knew I had to hide, and that Seru needed me to keep moving. Eli felt the weight of every word. This wasn't just a refugee story. This was a war survivor. A mother who'd walked through ash and wreckage with a child she wasn't even supposed to have. You left him in the trash, he said gently. Why? Her face tightened. I was dying. He nodded, not in judgment, just understanding. I thought, if someone found him, if someone kind existed, maybe he would live. I was ready to let myself go, but I couldn't let him go with me. Eli stepped forward, slow and deliberate. You weren't wrong. Someone kind did find him. She smiled then, a small, exhausted smile. Yes, and now I don't know what happens next. Neither do I, Eli admitted. But we figure it out, one day at a time. She studied him. You're not afraid? I've seen worse, he said, and I've lost more. She tilted her head, curious. You lost a child. It wasn't a question. He didn't ask how she knew. He just nodded. She was 5, he said after a long moment. Car accident. A year after I came back from deployment. My wife didn't make it either. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was shared. I thought I'd stop feeling things after that, he said. But then your boy cried. And you came, she said. Yeah. They stood in the garage doorway, 2 people who had lost too much, breathing in desert air like it was a lifeline. Zara looked down at Seru, who stirred slightly in his sleep, a tiny sigh escaping his lips. He won't survive alone. He's not alone, Eli said. Neither of you are. She looked up, eyes shimmering, not from tears, but something deeper, trust, maybe even hope. Eli took a slow breath. If people start asking questions, I'll lie. You don't even know what we are. I don't need to. She stepped closer then, just a little. Enough that the warmth between them was no longer just metaphorical. She smelled like metal and something faintly sweet, like wild desert flowers after rain. You are strange, Eli. I get that a lot. For the first time she laughed, a real quiet, breathy sound that made his chest ache in the best possible way. She turned back toward the cot, scooped up Seru, and kissed his head again. I should rest. You both should. She looked back once more before disappearing into the dimness of the garage. Thank you for the eggs and the honesty. Eli watched the shadows swallow her again. He leaned back against the doorframe, looking up at the stars. Whatever had brought her here, whatever war she'd escaped, it wasn't over. But she'd survived it. And maybe, just maybe, they'd survive what came next. Because something about the way she held her son, and the way she'd told her story tonight, told him that she wasn't just running anymore, she was starting to root, and that more than anything made him want to stay, even if the sky came crashing down. The desert sun had not yet climbed the ridge, but light was beginning to fill the space. It came in softly, filtered through dirty garage windows and warped blinds, settling over metal and concrete like the world was exhaling after a long night. The air still held a nighttime chill, a rare moment of cool in a place where everything baked beneath the sky. Eli stood at the stove in the small back room of the shop, pouring water into a dented kettle. The flame flickered low under the burner. The hiss of heat touching steel was the only sound. Behind him, in the shadows of the shop, Zara stirred. He didn't turn around right away. He'd grown used to the quiet of her movements, careful, observant, almost feline. She never stumbled, never made noise that didn't serve a purpose. Still, there was something about the way she moved today that felt different, less guarded, less like prey ready to run. Zara crossed the space slowly, Seru tucked in her arms. The baby was restless, shifting against her chest in little twitching motions, his mouth open as he sought her instinctively. Eli noticed the way she adjusted her hold on him, her long fingers brushing over his cheek before she lowered herself onto the cot. Her expression was calm but focused, eyes half-lidded with the weight of exhaustion that never truly left her. Then, without ceremony, she pulled aside the soft wrap covering her chest and brought Saru to her breast. Eli froze for a moment, not out of discomfort but respect. The moment was quiet, natural, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. Seru latched on with a soft sigh, his tiny fingers curling against her skin. Zara stroked his hair, long and dark like hers. She whispered something to him, words Eli couldn't understand but felt anyway. A lullaby in a language shaped by a different world, yet still deeply human in tone. Eli kept his back turned and focused on the kettle, letting her have that space. But Zara spoke anyway. "You do not need to turn away," she said gently. "This is not shameful." He nodded once and turned slightly, enough to show he was listening. "I know," he said. "I just didn't want to intrude." She looked up at him with an unreadable expression, then down at Seru. "He gets stronger every day." "He looks it," Eli replied, leaning against the counter. "You both do." Silence settled again, companionable, thoughtful. When Seru finished, Zara held him upright and rubbed his back with a rhythm that seemed ancient, like her hands had known how to do this long before her mind had time to think about it. "I was born to do this," she said, almost to herself. "But I never expected to." Eli tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She laid Seru down gently on the cot, tucked a blanket around his legs, then remained seated beside him, elbows resting on her knees. "On my world," she began, "my kind does not have children for love, not often. It is strategic. Genetic selection, breeding compatibility, monitored unions, cold, precise. Love is considered inefficient, dangerous." Eli walked over and sat on a low stool across from her, close enough to hear, but not invade. "So he wasn't supposed to happen?" Zara shook her head. He was a deviation. His father and I, we were assigned to the same ship. We trained together, worked together. We weren't supposed to bond, but it happened slowly, quietly. We started eating meals together, arguing over books, laughing. She smiled softly. "He made me laugh. It wasn't allowed, but no one stopped us. Not then." "What happened?" "Our mission was peaceful exploration, but our people, some of them, thought peace was foolish, that Earth was a threat, that any interaction risked corruption. They believed your species was too violent, too chaotic to be trusted." Eli's jaw tightened slightly. "They're not wrong about the violent part." "But not all of you," she said, looking at him. "That's what he believed. That's why he helped me escape when the radicals attacked our ship." "You said he didn't make it." Zara nodded slowly, the lines around her eyes deepening. "He stayed behind to overload the systems, bought me time. I was already in the pod when I realized he wasn't following." She closed her eyes. "He knew I was pregnant. He knew what it meant, but he also knew they'd come for us if we survived." Eli didn't speak. The weight of her loss was too fresh, too specific for cliches. "He gave his life for us," she said, "and now I carry that sacrifice every time I look at our son." Eli looked down at Seru. The baby's breathing was slow, peaceful. His violet skin glowed faintly in the low morning light. "He looks like you," Eli said. Zara gave a faint smile. "He has his father's quiet." They sat there for a long moment, the only sound the slow ticking of the wall clock and the wind nudging the shop door. Then Zara tilted her head at him. "You carry something too," she said. "I feel it, in your movements, in your silence." Eli leaned back slightly, the question hitting deeper than he expected. "I was married," he said quietly. "Claire. We had a daughter, Nora, brightest damn kid you ever saw." He smiled for a moment, brief and broken. 2 years after I got back from my last deployment, a drunk driver T-boned their car. Middle of the afternoon. They were coming home from her piano lesson. Zara's eyes stayed on his. I was in the shop, listening to an engine idle wrong, trying to decide if it was a fuel injector or a warped valve. That's what I was doing when they died. His voice cracked and he looked away. I buried them both. Then I stopped talking to most people, stopped going into town. I fixed engines, drank, slept on the floor more often than the bed. After a while, the silence became easier than trying to explain myself to anyone. Zara didn't interrupt. She let the words settle. I didn't think I had anything left to give, Eli said, until I heard your boy crying behind the dumpster. She reached over and placed her hand gently on his forearm. Her touch was light but grounding. You saved him, she said. Eli met her gaze. Maybe he saved me. The door creaked slightly in the wind, reminding them both that the world was still out there, wide and watching. They'll come eventually, Zara said, her voice more resolute than afraid. I know. What will you do? Eli stood slowly and looked around the garage. The tools, the cot, the woman and child asleep in a place that should have been lifeless. I'll do what I didn't get to do before, he said. Protect the family I have now. Zara's eyes softened, not in sadness, but in recognition. Outside, the first heat of the sun began to seep through the walls, brushing over them like a silent warning. But inside, for a little while longer, they were safe, together. The air was different that morning. Eli felt it before he even opened his eyes. The light was wrong, muted, hazy, like the sun had forgotten how to rise. And the quiet wasn't the peaceful kind that had settled into the shop over the past few days. It was heavy, uneasy, like something was holding its breath. Then he heard the sound, not the sharp, healthy cry of a hungry baby, but something else, wet, fragile, choked, like something small was struggling just to breathe. He was on his feet before he could think. Zara was already sitting up on the cot, holding Saru in her arms. Her face was pale, paler than usual, her violet skin almost ashen in the morning light. The baby lay limp against her chest, his usually restless limbs motionless, his breathing shallow and rapid. His skin, once glowing faintly with that otherworldly hue, had dulled to a sickly, bluish gray. He's not responding, she whispered. Eli crossed the space in seconds. He knelt beside them, eyes scanning the infant, hands twitching, unsure of where to begin. This wasn't a machine he could fix with a wrench. This was a child, and he looked like he was fading by the second. What happened? Eli asked, voice low and urgent. Zara shook her head, her lips trembling. He was warm all night. I thought it was from being close to me. But this morning, his pulse is fast. His body won't stop shaking. She pulled the blanket tighter around him, her movements quick, almost panicked. He's cold now, too cold. His temperature, he can't regulate it. Not here, not in this air. Okay, Eli said, standing. Okay, we can fix this. What do we need? What helps? Zara's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. I don't know. I've never seen this before, not with hybrids, not on Earth. Eli ran a hand through his hair and paced a short line across the room, trying to think, trying not to panic. The shop was stocked with basic first aid supplies, but nothing for an alien child. He didn't even know what organ system Saru had. Did he need oxygen? Was this respiratory? Neurological? We need heat, Zara said suddenly. Not the sun, core warmth, stable even. I've got a thermal blanket in the back, one of the old army-grade ones, maybe two. He moved quickly, throwing open a storage chest and yanking out the silver-coated gear. Wrap him in this. I'll get the space heater running. As Zara carefully wrapped the baby, Eli dragged the electric heater into place and hooked it up to the generator. The moment the low hum kicked in, Zara shifted closer, placing Saru directly in front of it. But he didn't move. Zara held him tighter, murmuring in her own language, quiet, rhythmic, like a chant, like something passed down through centuries of mothers trying to hold their children together with nothing but sound. Eli knelt beside her again. There has to be something else. He was fine yesterday. Zara didn't look at him. Her voice was calm but shaking at the edges. I told you before, his biology is different. His body is still learning how to exist here. He's not fully like me, or like you. You said he was strong. He is, her eyes filled with tears again. But he's small, and the crash. He didn't get medical support when he was born. Not the kind he needed. I did the best I could, but I was alone. The silence between them sharpened. Eli rose and turned toward his shelves, rummaging through old supplies, cords, and equipment. There's a wildlife vet in town, retired, used to treat livestock and exotics. Doesn't ask too many questions. Zara's eyes flicked up. Do you trust him? I don't need to, Eli said, grabbing a portable oxygen tank and tossing it onto the table. He owes me. Years ago, I helped him cover up a broken transport license when a state inspector came around. She hesitated. Will he know what Saru is? Number. And if he suspects, he won't say a damn thing. Zara looked back down at her son. I don't want to lose him. You won't, Eli said. We're going now. 15 minutes later, Eli's old truck groaned down the dirt road that led away from the shop. The heater was plugged into a portable battery pack and kept humming in the back seat. Zara sat beside it, holding Saru wrapped in thermal layers, her hands never leaving his skin. Eli drove like the road was trying to disappear under his tires. The vet's cabin was tucked behind a collapsed barn, surrounded by what once passed for pasture, but now looked like sun-cracked earth and skeletal fence posts. A rusted windmill creaked in the breeze as they pulled up. Eli jumped out, jogged to the cabin door, and knocked hard. He didn't wait long. An older man in worn denim opened the door, rubbing sleep from his eyes. What in God's name, Eli? I need your help, now! The man blinked. You got a dog in labor or something? It's a child. He's not local. The vet's expression changed. He didn't ask another question. He just stepped back and held the door open. Inside, the air smelled like old medicine and dust. The lights were dim, the walls lined with metal cabinets and faded anatomy posters. Zara entered silently, cradling Saru with the reverence of a priest. The vet looked at her, then at the baby, and nodded once. He didn't speak again, as he motioned them toward the exam table. Over the next hour, Eli watched a man trained in farm injuries and parrot illnesses piece together how to stabilize an alien infant using nothing more than heat, hydration, and oxygen saturation charts meant for goats. Zara answered every question in low, deliberate tones. Eli helped wherever he could, translating, holding Saru's tiny arm as a makeshift sensor was taped to it. The baby didn't cry. He made no sound at all. That, more than anything, terrified them. By nightfall, they were back at the garage. Saru was breathing more steadily now, still wrapped in the silver blanket, his chest rising with more rhythm, more purpose. Eli had set up a small space near the back, lined with foam, insulated against the cold desert air. The heater stayed on. Zara hadn't moved from his side in hours. She looked up at Eli now, her voice rough. He almost died. But he didn't, she nodded. Because of you. No, Eli said. Because of you. You knew what he needed. You didn't panic. I've lived every day with fear since the crash, she said. But this was the closest I've come to breaking. Eli sat beside her, hands resting on his knees. People think danger only comes with guns and explosions, he said. But it's quiet, too. It sneaks in through a cough or a fever. Zara looked down at Saru. He's not safe here. He's safer than anywhere else. She looked at him, voice barely above a whisper. You still think that? Eli met her eyes. I know that. She nodded once slowly and leaned back against the wall. Her body sagged, finally giving in to the exhaustion that had been building since morning. Eli stayed with her until she slept, her hands still on her child's chest, her breath finally slowing. And though the desert wind rattled the windows and the heater buzzed quietly on, the shop remained steady. A boy had survived, and so had they. The morning arrived not with silence, but with motion. Soft, almost imperceptible movements at first. Saru's tiny fingers gripping the edge of his blanket. The flutter of violet-tinted eyelids. The quiet, instinctive coo that escaped his mouth as he stirred for the first time in a full day. It was the sound of life finding its rhythm again. Eli was already awake, sitting at the edge of the cot with one arm resting on his knee, the other holding a cup of lukewarm coffee he hadn't touched. He hadn't slept much. Too alert, too afraid to look away in case the boy slipped again into that terrifying stillness. But now, as he watched Saru stretch and yawn, his body loose and warm, the tension in Eli's shoulders began to ease. Across the room, Zara knelt beside a basin of water. She was wringing out a cloth, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back in a loose knot. There was no panic in her hands now, no trembling desperation, just quiet purpose. A mother tending to her child. A woman reclaiming calm after a storm. He's warm again, Eli said, his voice rough from disuse. Zara glanced up, then crossed to the cot, placing the back of her hand on Siru's forehead. Her face didn't show relief, not yet, but her breath hitched slightly, as if she were allowing herself to hope. His color is back too, she said. His body responded to the heater. The hydration helped. Siru let out a squeaky little sigh and turned his head toward the sound of her voice. His eyes, those wide, reflective pools of dark indigo, opened fully and focused on her. Zara's entire expression softened. Her hand instinctively stroked his hair. He sees me, she whispered. Really sees me. Eli stood, moving to her side. He's a fighter. He gets that from both of us. She said it without hesitation, and something about the way the word us slipped from her mouth settled into the air like a stone in water, rippled and real. They spent the rest of the morning rebuilding the rhythm they hadn't realized they'd begun to need. Eli cooked, this time something warm. Instant oatmeal sweetened with a dash of old maple syrup and the last of the canned fruit. Zara carefully fed Siru, who gurgled between bites, still weak but showing sparks of hunger. That, more than anything, reassured them. Later, Zara stepped outside for the first time in days. The sun was high and gentle, the wind sweeping across the yard in lazy arcs, carrying the scent of metal and dry earth. She stood barefoot on the warm concrete just beyond the garage door, letting the light touch her skin, the air fill her lungs. It felt like breathing for the first time. Eli joined her, wiping his hands on a rag, the scent of engine grease clinging faintly to him. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her and looked out over the flat stretch of desert, the pale hills rising in the distance like tired sentinels. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, her eyes on the horizon. "I used to," he said. "All the time. After Claire and Nora died, I told myself I'd pack up, go north, maybe vanish into the woods, but I never moved. This place, this dust and steel and quiet, was the only thing that made sense. And now?" He looked over at her, then back at the horizon. "Now it feels like something worth staying for finally showed up." She didn't respond, but he didn't expect her to. The way her eyes softened told him enough. Back inside, Seru had fallen asleep again, this time curled in a small pile of blankets with one hand clutching a wrench Eli had given him earlier, a toddler-sized comfort object forged in rust and usefulness. Zara sat cross-legged beside him, humming low in her throat, not a song but a tone, a resonance, something soothing, alien, and beautiful. Eli watched her from across the room. She seemed more solid now, no longer just surviving but re-rooting. Her body had gained back some strength. Her posture was less guarded. Even her voice, when she spoke to Siru, carried more color, more rise and fall. That night, Eli found an old stack of children's books tucked in a crate behind the office. He cleaned them up, brushed away the dust, mended a few torn pages with tape, and brought them to the cot. "I figured it couldn't hurt to read to him," he said. "Might help with the language." Zara picked up one with faded farm animals on the cover. She traced the worn illustrations with her fingertip, a small smile curving her lips. "These are simple stories," she said. "They're the best kind," he replied. "You start with cows and colors, and before you know it, you're explaining why the stars don't fall." She looked at him, head tilted slightly. "Do they?" "Not here," Eli said. "Not yet." He sat beside her as she opened the book and began to read aloud. Her voice was careful at first, deliberate. She stumbled over some of the words, English still shaped oddly on her tongue, but she caught the rhythm quickly. Seru stirred and made a sleepy noise that almost sounded like laughter. Eli watched them both, his chest full of something he couldn't name, not just tenderness, not just relief. It was the quiet weight of belonging. When the book ended, Zara closed it softly and placed it beside the cot. "You're good at that," Eli said. "I'm learning," she replied. They sat in silence for a while. The desert outside was dark now, the kind of darkness that swallowed light and sound alike. But inside the shop, everything felt warm, alive. Zara leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed. "You've built something here." "Wasn't trying to," Eli said. "But maybe it's time to stop pretending I'm not." She looked at him. "You're more than you think." He gave a short laugh. "You're the first person who's told me that in a long time." "Well," she said softly, "you're the first person I've trusted with everything I am." And in that moment, something shifted between them, Not dramatic, not loud, but profound. A silent agreement. A promise neither needed to speak. They weren't lost anymore. Not her, not him, not the boy who had nearly slipped away. They had found something rare in the ruins of what they'd once known. Not just safety, not just survival, a beginning. And as the heater hummed softly in the background and Siru slept peacefully beside them, they leaned into that new, uncertain future, no longer waiting for the worst, but finally daring to imagine the best. By the end of that week, the wind shifted. It didn't scream across the desert anymore. It whispered. Warm, dry gusts rolled in from the hills, stirring dust and lifting leaves in soft spirals. Even the air felt less tense, like the land itself had started to settle, just as they had. Inside the garage, everything had changed. It wasn't just the insulation Eli had added near the cot, or the second heater he'd wired up to make the nights easier. It wasn't the added food storage he'd started building quietly in the corner. It wasn't even the new solar-powered battery he'd installed with help from Zara, who understood energy more intuitively than any tech manual ever could. It was the atmosphere, the rhythm, the way the place felt. Once the garage had been a shrine to loneliness. Now it felt like a home. Seru's laugh filled the space like sunlight. The boy had grown bolder each day, crawling, standing, testing the limits of his newly strengthened limbs. And today, he took his first real step. Zara had been sitting on the floor near the tool bench, organizing small boxes of bolts and screws with surprising precision. Eli was just outside the bay door, sanding down a piece of salvaged wood for the new table he was building. Siru had been holding onto the edge of a crate, swaying slightly, eyes locked on his mother. And then, without warning, without ceremony, he let go. One step, wobble, another. Then a delighted squeal as he toppled forward into her arms. Zara caught him and laughed, this full, surprise sound that made Eli drop what he was holding and run inside. She looked up at him, radiant, her arms around their son. He walked, she said. I saw. He walked, Eli. He grinned so wide it hurt. Told you he was tough. Zara looked down at Siru, whose tiny chest puffed proudly. He is. The rest of the day unfolded like a memory they'd one day tell back to themselves. They played music on Eli's old radio, a static-lace blend of blues and desert folk. Zara learned to make simple stew using lentils and powdered broth, while Eli held Siru, the boy's tiny hand tangled in his shirt. That night, the stars came out early, burning sharp against the endless black. They laid blankets out in the yard and sat together, Zara, Eli, and Siru tucked between them like the center of gravity. I used to think stars were cold, she said, watching the sky. Just distant, dying things. They kind of are, Eli replied, leaning back on his elbows, but they don't feel that way from down here. No, she agreed. They don't. He turned his head, watching her in profile, her features illuminated by the soft glow of the firelight they'd built in a rusted barrel. Her hair was loose, her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked like she belonged to the world, not to war, not to a mission, to this. I used to live in shadows, she said, fleeing, always calculating what I could carry, what I could leave behind. I thought peace was a trick, something only weak beings believed in. Eli looked down at Siru, sleeping peacefully between them. And now? Now I think peace isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of love, of choosing to stay, to fight for something gentle. He was quiet a moment, then nodded. Yeah, that sounds about right. She turned to face him. I stayed because of him, but I stayed longer because of you. Her words hung in the air, bare and real. Eli didn't answer with words. He leaned forward and kissed her, slow, certain, not a question, not hesitation, just an answer. Her hand came up to his jaw, fingers brushing the scruff of his cheek. She melted into the kiss like it was something remembered, something they'd been working toward since the moment he pulled her out of the heat and gave her water. When they broke apart, the world was still. Even the wind paused. Are you afraid? She asked. I was, he said, but not anymore. Me neither. They sat like that in silence, watching the fire crackle, listening to Siru's quiet breathing. The world beyond the desert still existed. Governments, satellites, factions she'd once feared would find them. But for now, they felt impossibly far away. Tomorrow the world might return, but tonight they had each other. A week passed, then another. Seru's strength grew. His eyes tracked more, responded faster. He began stringing together sounds that weren't quite words, but still made Zara laugh every time he made them. His favorite was ba, which he repeated endlessly while crawling after Eli's boots. Zara started teaching him small words in her native language, the syllables fluid and musical. Eli added English terms in turn. It became a game, a dance. One of them would say, sun, and the other would follow with the word from her world, Kaishara. Seru repeated both. Bilingual already, Eli joked one morning. Kid's gonna outtalk both of us by the time he's 2. He already outsmarts us, Zara replied. He understands comfort, connection, things we had to relearn. Eli nodded. He's what we became, together. Zara said nothing at first. Then, as if the thought had been waiting at the edge of her mind all along, she whispered, "He's our bridge." The words hit something deep in Eli. Not a symbol, not a hope, a child, a reason to begin again. That night, they gathered around the fire again, but this time they didn't talk about fear or the past. They talked about planting something in the dusty soil behind the garage, an herb garden maybe. Zara sketched out strange flower shapes from her homeworld, herbs with cooling properties, petals that glowed faintly in moonlight. Eli promised they'd build raised beds, add mesh for the rabbits. Seru clapped in agreement, though no one had asked him. When they carried the child inside and laid him down between them, Zara pressed a kiss to his forehead, then turned to Eli. "I've been so many things," she said. "A soldier, a refugee, a mother, but never just a woman, until now." "You're all of those," he said, "and more." She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, and they sat in silence, the way only people who trust each other completely can. In the stillness, Eli realized he no longer thought of the garage as a shell. It wasn't a bunker. It wasn't a graveyard. It was a beginning. Tomorrow they would finish the table. Soon they'd start planting. The seasons would come and go, and if the sky ever changed, if someone did come looking, they would face it together, not running, not hiding, as a family. He looked at her, at the sleeping child, and then up at the stars overhead. They hadn't saved the galaxy, but they had saved each other, and in the end, that was more than enough. The wind still passed through the desert, but now it came soft, carrying the scent of soil, not just dust. Morning light stretched slowly across the garage roof, where rows of solar panels caught the sun like silent sentinels. Below them, inside the open bay doors, laughter echoed out across the yard. Seru ran barefoot through the patch of loose dirt where they'd planted herbs just days earlier. The small garden wasn't much, just a few sprigs of green pushing stubbornly through the earth. But it was alive. A start. And Seru treated it like a jungle of wonders. He squealed as Zara chased him in slow, exaggerated steps, her hands poised like claws. "I'm going to catch you," she sang. "No!" Seru laughed, tumbling into Eli's arms instead. "Baba, save me!" "Baba's got you, little man," Eli said, sweeping him up into the air. Zara came to a stop, breathing harder than she used to, but smiling so brightly the desert seemed to respond. Her long hair was tied up, a thin streak of pale green paint still on her cheek from earlier. They'd been repainting the front of the garage that morning. She hadn't stopped smiling since. Eli set Seru down gently on the wooden deck they'd built together, a crude but sturdy addition to the side of the shop. It had become their space: morning coffee, evening stories, quiet naps under the shade of a canvas tarp. Now, it felt like the heart of their home. "Garden's looking good," Eli said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Zara nodded, crouching beside the low planter boxes. "Your soil's stubborn, but it listens when you're patient," he chuckled. "Sounds like me." She raised an eyebrow. "Don't flatter yourself." Seru plopped down next to her, pressing his fingers gently into the dirt. "Grow, grow, grow," he whispered. Zara smiled at him. "That's the right idea." The day stretched long and lazy, filled with nothing urgent, just tasks chosen freely. Eli fixed a fence post. Zara salvaged metal to repurpose into plant markers. Seru collected rocks and sorted them by color, proudly presenting each one like a precious gem. At dusk, they lit a small fire and cooked together, simmered beans with wild herbs, served over flatbread. Seru fell asleep before they even finished eating, curled on a pile of blankets, his arm wrapped around a worn plush tool Eli had made him. Zara leaned back against Eli's chest, both of them watching the stars appear above. I used to think I'd never see the future, she said. He kissed her temple. This is the future. They sat in silence for a while. There were no sirens, no shadows chasing them, no need to hide. Just a man, a woman, and a child. Just warmth, just peace, just life, finally, beautifully, on their own terms. And for the first time in years, the stars above didn't feel cold. They felt like home.